Howdy folks, it's Tom, your frugal prepper. I am out here in the garage. We are going to attempt in this video to install this dowel pin and test fit the balance shaft assembly to make sure that that dowel pin has the clearance and everything it needs. The guy at the machine shop said if this turns out a little long, I might have to belt sand it down. We're going to find out. So I broke the original dowel pin and they made this dowel pin for me on a lathe. I'm going to be using this plastiguage to do a sanity check on the bearing clearances. You can buy this at AutoZone. You may have to argue with them a little bit about what it is and the fact that they do have it in the back, but they do have it. We're then going to use that plastiguage to double check our bearing clearances. In this particular engine, I cannot measure the minimum bearing clearance with plastiguage if the clearance is too tight. But I can check the maximum clearance, so that's what I'm going to do. Just a sanity check that the bearing manufacturers and machine shop did everything right before you do a final assembly. Don't expect any problems because I'm doing a standard size crank that was just polished with standard bearings. I'll be using this Ultra Lube or Ultra Slick by Permatext engine assembly pre-lube. This will be used on all my bearing surfaces in the engine. When I assemble it, it will not go in your cylinders or your piston rings. You don't want that on there. You want standard engine oil for that, or your rings won't seat properly, or may not seat properly. The other things I'll be using for this will be a torque angle meter. This just allows me to turn a bolt exactly a certain number of degrees. And a torque wrench. This is just a Harbor Freight 3/8 drive bar and click torque wrench. If you got some snap-on stuff, probably better. I have that. I printed out all my specs, my torque specifications, my clearances for everything on the whole engine. And I have those out here with me. I think that covers about everything we're going to do. So let's get to it. Okay, so this is the dowel pin that the machine shop has made for me. Here is the original dowel pin right over here. Still in the block. This is the one I didn't try to take out and break. The machine shop got the broken piece out for me. And then they turned this one on the lathe. And they just made it so that it fits in there nice and snug, but it doesn't have to be driven in with a hammer or anything. So we'll get that down in there. Just kind of turn it, make sure it's seated well. And then I've got these little feeler gauges things, and I'm just going to make sure that we're at about the same exact height of this dowel pin here to this one right here, and they're right dead on. I don't think I'm going to have to sand that down or do anything. It's right dead on. So now I'm going to grab my balance shaft assembly. This thing's heavier than it looks. This is just big spinning counterweights to keep the engine from vibrating itself to death. And that sits on there. It's not moving or wiggling. Doesn't rock. That's just perfect. It's exactly how we want it. So I know that that dowel pin is going to fit perfect. Balance shaft assembly is going to go on, so I can get that out of my way. We're good to go. So now I'm just going to go ahead and take off my main caps, and we've been careful with me and the machine shop to keep the main bolts in their original positions. And you know, I took notes that these are numbered. Let me show you. These are numbered. So when you disassemble, you need to take notes. I know that this number 1 goes towards the exhaust side of the engine, which is that side. So I took all these notes when I disassembled it and pictures so that I would know. Because by the time you get everything back from the machine shop, you might forget. So make sure you take notes and pictures and everything. Oh, that one's on there a little tight. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just wipe these journals down here real good. Wipe off where it seats up. You don't want any junk in between this and the bottom of your bearing, or you're not going to get an accurate reading with the plastiguage and you're going to have clearance issues. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and start putting in my bearings. I'm going to start my bearings that have the thrust bearing on them. These are the ones that have this little side part. Now it stops the crank from going forward and backwards. So I always look, I don't think there's a top and a bottom to these. I'm just going to make sure. Well, there might be because there's an oil hole on one. Yeah. So yeah, so we see there's our oil hole right there. So that's going to go in the bottom where there's an oil hole. Don't drop your bearings. You know, again, make sure that this is nice and clean on the bottom. Wouldn't hurt to go over it with the towel. Just make sure. And they're just going to sit down in there. You want to make sure they're nice and flush. Like so. Then the other part of this guy is just going to sit off to the side for now because he's going to go in the main cap. But first we're going to get these in and set the crank in. Now these are the ones without the thrust bearing. They just look like that instead. So there's 4 of them that just have a nice flat surface like that with no hole. And then there's 4 that have this ridged surface here with the little hole. And those are the ones that go on the bottom because that's where your oil hole is. Again, just make sure it's nice and clean. And they'll go in there much the same way. I'm going to get a paper towel. That red towel's making a little too much lint for me to be happy. Just set it down there to where it's nice and even, like so. It sits right in there. They have a little tang on the one end there, as you can see right here, and that tang has a matching spot right here in the journal. And the last one. And also, double check your bearings when you get them to the right size. I don't know if you can see that or not. Right there where it says STD, that means it's standard. It'll also tell you if it's like 10 or 20 or 30 thousandths over. Or in that same spot. You want to make sure that's the same amount, same size as your crank. Of course, you're going to have real problems if your crank's like standard and you put in a 10 or 20 over bearing. It's not going to turn. But if you have a 10 under crank and you put in a standard bearing, you're not going to have any oil pressure. So now what I'm going to do is go through here and put in a little bit of this Ultra Lube here on this Ultra Lube on each one of these bearing surfaces. This smells yummy. Alright, so now we're just going to put a drop of this or so on each of these little bearings. Let's put a little bit here. You really want this lubrication, I'll spread it out. When I coat your bearing surface, you don't want to scratch up your bearings before you get oil pressure in this sucker. That one could use a little bit more. Now on your thrust bearing here in the middle, you want to put a little bit on this outside surface as well. Because the crank's going to rub up against that as well. Okay, that looks good. So now, let's get the crank and drop her in here. Big heavy crank. Jeez. For a 4-banger, she's got a heavy crank. Try to drop it straight down in. You can. I kind of went through and wiped these journals off as best as I could beforehand. They're pretty clean. We'll give her a little turn. Make sure. Well, I might just go ahead and just put another little drop of assembly pre-lube down on these journals. I'd rather go a little over on lubrication than under. Then I'll just kind of turn that in. Feels good. Alright, so now I'm just going to kind of wipe off the excess out here a little bit. That shouldn't hurt anything with the cap torquing down. It should squeeze out of the way, but alright. So now I'm going to pretty much do the same thing with each of these main caps. Again, the number goes towards the exhaust side. I'm going to lay the bolts in the same order as the block down here. Number 1 goes towards the front of the engine. I'm just going to wipe down the surface of it real good. Down here. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my top bearing in here. Maybe. I'll put that side in first. There we go. They fit snug, but they go in there, and again, there's how that little notch fits in. Okay, then the number side towards the exhaust side. This was line honed, so it's real important to put these back in the same order they line honed it, in the same direction. Alright, so now we're going to put our bolts back in. We'll just get those started for now. I'll do the same thing here with number 2. Go slow. Take your time doing this. Just be very particular. Do everything in the right order. Don't get things confused or lay them in the wrong spots. Double check everything. Looks good. Make sure this bearing looks clean on both sides. So what I did is lay that down with the notch side in there kind of first, put my thumb over that end, push this end in, make sure they're kind of level. We're all installed. Number goes towards the exhaust side. Set it down in there. Get our bolts started. Now this next one is the one that takes the thrust bearing, and you can tell on this one because it's got this opening spot right here for that thrust bearing. I'll zoom out here a little for you. And make sure this looks good and clean. It does. Yeah, we're just going to put that side right there in. Snap this side down. There we go. So our numbers facing the exhaust. And see, I've already got, I'm not putting pre-lube on here because there's pre-lube where I put it on the top of these journals. But I am going to go ahead and put a little bit on this thrust bearing surface. Even though there's probably some on the crank from the bottom bearing. Again, it can't hurt anything. Okay, number side towards the exhaust. Alright. This one. You know what this is? This is fun. I love this stuff. So now I'm just going to tighten these down to where they're nice and just snug. I'm trying to tighten them even too. I'm not torquing anything yet, but don't like tighten one side all the way down, but not the other. So I'm gonna bring them down even. I'm going to go over here next. I'm just going to kind of alternate around. I'm not doing my torquing pattern or anything yet. Just bringing it snug in. Shouldn't really have to force anything here. If you're forcing, something's wrong. But as these main caps kind of get seated down in there to the block, it may get a little bit tight, but it won't be like you gotta force it. That's why I'm using a stubby ratchet here. I can't over torque things. What I might do is go ahead and bring this one snug, and then we'll take it back out. Let's just make sure everything goes down okay and it's snug. It is. Everything turns nice. No excessive play. Feels right. Feels pretty perfect. So now, what I'm going to do is take this to where it's just kind of got a nice level spot here in between the connecting rod and the counterweight. And we'll pop this one here back off. You really don't want to turn your crank with any of these like loose, because it could get crooked. So you want to make sure that you have them snugged. And then while I'm plastigaging it, I won't really turn it. if I can help it. Okay, so now we're ready to plastiguage. Okay, so I've got my one little small piece of red plastiguage. You just open this up, take a little tiny piece out, put that right there where your bearing's going to come down, straight across. Then we're going to put this cap back on, right across here, and then we're going to torque it into place. Go ahead and put it on here snug first. Yeah, you probably could just take all the caps off and put plastiguage down and do them all at once. I like to do them one at a time. Take it nice and slow. Okay, so now I gotta torque it to 15 foot-pounds. I'm gonna set my wrench up here. So 15 foot-pounds. Okay, my socket. Get in the tightening position, and then we're just gonna go through here. It's okay to hold a torque wrench right here at the edge. Let me zoom out a little here for you. It's okay if you need to hold a torque wrench right here at the edge, but that's the only spot you should be holding a torque wrench. You never want to hold it in here. You want to grab it by this handle and go here, and there it clicked. Oh, we're gonna do this one. Okay. Okay. So now that's 15 foot-pounds. So now I gotta set up my torque angle meter to go an additional 90 degrees. Okay, so now I have my torque angle meter set. I went ahead and just hit it with the paint marker at 0 and 90. My needle is at 0. This little clippy thing holds it in place so that this part doesn't turn and then the middle part turns. So we'll put my breaker bar on here. We'll go ahead and turn it 90 degrees. Wow. There we go, 90 degrees. A little harder than it looked. Okay, then we'll set up over here on this bolt and do the same thing. What you can do is you can loosen this little thing here and then turn that to your 0 degree mark. And then we're ready for cranker. That's our 90 degrees. Take that off. And now we're ready to go ahead and break it back apart. Okay. So you can see down there, let's see if you can see that. On your bearing, that little spot right here, that is what you want to line up with your plastiguage and see what your clearance looks like. And I can see with this little gauge-o-meter, we're a little less than 0.002 according to this. Let's see, just find the widest spot, and yeah, we're dead on 0.002. And I'll double check the mark. It'll also leave a mark here on the crankshaft, and we're pretty much dead on 0.002. But let me show you this up close. Find just kind of your widest spot there, and you'll see that we're just like right dead on that 0.002. Maybe a hair smaller, but we can go to 0.0023, so we're well within spec. And that's nice, because I know that's within spec from the plastiguage. It's not down towards that minimum specification. Then all we got to do is just take and get that plastiguage completely off of there. You might have to scrape it with your fingernail some, but you want to make sure that's completely gone. Off of both surfaces. It's nice and clean. I'll just clean this surface off. Then I'm just going to put another drop of Assembly Pre-Lube on here to make sure that we're lubed. After all that, I'll put that back down and just snug it up. Make sure your numbers towards your exhaust side. Get it snug. Okay, and then we're ready to do the same process for number 2. I'll go ahead and get it all set up here. That is good enough. I'm happy with that. Whew. Alright, we've got ourselves one installed crankshaft. It's a little bit of work, but it's worth it. It's gonna be great. All the clearances on this thing are identical and perfect, so I'm very, very happy. Alright, I'll get the rods, bearings, and the rod bearings and the piston rings ordered next, and we'll show you how we install those. It's Tom, your frugal prepper. Be happy and frugal out there, folks. I'll talk to you later.